Survival income. Survival income is the level where every single dollar that comes in already has a job before it even arrives. Rent, food, transportation, and whatever bill is currently overdue. There's no decision-making involved at this level, only triage, because the money is gone before the question of saving or investing ever becomes relevant. At this stage, your brain isn't thinking in months or years. It's thinking in days, sometimes hours, calculating whether the account will hold until the next paycheck clears. The onset of this level is rarely a single dramatic event. It's usually a slow accumulation of small gaps, a wage that never quite matched rising costs, an emergency that drained whatever buffer existed, a job loss that took longer to recover from than expected. At its peak, survival income creates a specific kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with how many hours you're working and everything to do with how much mental bandwidth gets consumed by constant calculation. You're not lazy. You're running financial triage in the background of every single decision. What time to buy groceries before prices change, which bill can wait another few days, whether a small unexpected expense becomes a crisis. The myth is that people stuck here lack discipline. In reality, discipline is often the one resource people at this level have in surplus, because surviving on too little requires a level of constant calculation that people with comfortable income never have to develop. Paycheck-to-paycheck income. Paycheck-to-paycheck income looks like progress from the outside. The bills get paid, nothing is technically in crisis, but the moment income arrives, it's already been mentally spent before it lands. This level is defined less by the amount of money and more by the complete absence of slack in the system. Every dollar has a destination, and any disruption, a car repair, a medical bill, a reduced shift, immediately threatens the entire structure. The onset here is gradual lifestyle calibration. Spending naturally rises to match whatever the income happens to be, not because of recklessness, but because expenses quietly expand to fill whatever space is available. A slightly better apartment, a slightly newer car, small comforts that feel earned rather than excessive. At its peak, this level traps people in a particular illusion, the sense of having made it simply because nothing is currently broken, while the absence of any savings buffer means one unexpected expense away from sliding straight back into survival income. The myth is that people at this level just need to budget better. Often the real issue isn't a lack of budgeting skill, it's that the income itself was calculated to exactly meet the cost of living, leaving no room for a buffer no matter how carefully it's tracked on a spreadsheet. Stability income. Stability income is the first level, where a genuine gap appears between what comes in and what has to go out immediately, and that gap is the entire difference. For the first time, a missed week of work or a moderate unexpected expense doesn't immediately threaten housing or food, because there's an actual buffer sitting between income and survival. This level changes the texture of daily thinking in a way that's easy to underestimate. Decisions stop being purely reactive and start incorporating a small amount of future planning, when to replace something before it breaks completely, whether a slightly more expensive option might actually last longer and cost less over time. The onset typically follows either a meaningful raise, a second income joining the household, or years of slow, consistent saving finally accumulating into something noticeable. At its peak, stability income introduces a strange new emotion that doesn't show up at lower levels: low-grade guilt. The sense that having any cushion at all while others don't feels almost undeserved, even when it was built through years of consistent effort. The myth is that stability feels like financial freedom. It doesn't yet. It feels like exhaling for the first time in years, while still remaining fully aware that the exhale could be temporary if anything significant goes wrong. Comfort income. Comfort income is the level where money stops being the first variable in every decision and starts becoming one factor among several, alongside time, preference, and quality. At this stage, a vacation gets planned around when it's convenient rather than when it's affordable. A meal out gets chosen based on what sounds good rather than what costs least. Small but meaningful shifts that change the emotional texture of everyday choices. The onset of comfort income often arrives quietly: a series of raises, a paid-off debt, a second income stabilizing. No single dramatic moment, just an accumulation that eventually crosses an invisible threshold. At its peak, comfort income creates a specific psychological trap that people rarely talk about. The lifestyle naturally rises to absorb whatever new income arrives: larger living space, nicer routine purchases, until the felt experience of comfort income starts resembling paycheck-to-paycheck income all over again, just with a higher number attached to it. The myth is that reaching this level automatically produces financial peace. In practice, it often produces a new ceiling that lifestyle quietly expands to meet, meaning the anxiety doesn't disappear. It simply renegotiates itself at a higher price point. Wealth-building income. Wealth-building income is the level where the income itself stops being the main event and starts becoming raw material:
fuel for assets that can eventually generate income on their own: investments, property, ownership stakes in something productive. This is a structural shift, not just a numerical one, because for the first time, money is being deliberately redirected away from immediate lifestyle improvements toward things designed to compound over time. The onset usually requires a level of income that exceeds lifestyle needs by a meaningful margin. Otherwise, there's nothing left over to redirect into anything that builds wealth, rather than simply supporting daily life. At its peak, wealth-building income starts producing a strange psychological effect. The temptation to inflate lifestyle to match the new income becomes constant. Every raise or bonus presents the same fork in the road: upgrade the lifestyle now, or redirect the surplus into something that grows. The myth is that people automatically build wealth once they earn enough to do so. The mechanism reveals something closer to the opposite. This is usually the exact income level where lifestyle inflation becomes most tempting, because for the first time there's genuinely enough margin to upgrade everything at once. And that temptation alone is why many people earning well above their needs still accumulate very little over time. Financial independence income. Financial independence income is the level where assets generate enough passive return to cover the cost of living without requiring active work at all, meaning the relationship between time and money has fundamentally changed. At this stage, a job becomes optional rather than mandatory, which sounds simple in theory but produces a complicated psychological shift in practice, because most people's identity has been quietly built around their work for so long that removing the requirement to work doesn't automatically remove the habit or the sense of purpose tied to it. The onset here typically follows years, sometimes decades, of consistent wealth-building income being redirected into assets rather than lifestyle, compounding slowly until the returns alone finally cross the threshold of covering actual living costs. At its peak, financial independence reveals something most people don't anticipate. The absence of financial pressure doesn't automatically produce contentment. It simply removes one specific source of stress while leaving every other question about meaning and purpose completely unanswered, and now impossible to avoid. The myth is that this level is the finish line. For many people who reach it, it functions less like an ending and more like the first moment they're forced to actually answer what they wanted all the income for in the first place.
Ultra-wealth income. Ultra-wealth income is the level where the original problem income was supposed to solve, covering basic needs, disappears so completely from view that it stops being a meaningful concept at all, replaced entirely by questions of influence, control, and scale. At this stage, spending decisions are no longer measured against a household budget. They're measured against entire portfolios, businesses, and sometimes economies, where a single decision can move markets or reshape industries rather than simply affecting one household's monthly numbers. The onset almost always involves either building something that scaled far beyond a single income stream, a business, a platform, an asset class that appreciated dramatically, or inheriting wealth that had already crossed this threshold generations earlier. At its peak, ultra-wealth income produces a strange inversion of every problem discussed so far. The anxiety doesn't disappear, it relocates entirely, away from whether bills get paid and toward whether the wealth itself is being managed, protected, and deployed effectively across complex structures most people never have to think about: taxes, legal exposure, reputation, succession. The myth is that money stops being a source of stress once it reaches the scale. In practice, the stress simply changes shape, trading the daily anxiety of scarcity for the constant management of complexity, where losing track of any one piece of a sprawling financial structure can undo years of careful building in ways far harder to recover from than a missed paycheck ever was. Generational income. Generational income is the level where the money itself outlives the person who built it, structured deliberately to transfer not just assets, but the systems, behaviors, and decisions required to maintain or grow them across multiple generations. This level isn't really about the size of the number anymore. It's about durability, whether the wealth is built in a way that can survive being inherited by people who didn't do the work of building it. The onset is almost always intentional rather than accidental. Nobody stumbles into generational wealth. It requires deliberate structuring well before it's ever needed. Trusts, education, shared values around money passed down alongside the assets themselves. At its peak, generational income exposes the actual fragility hiding behind large numbers. Research consistently shows that a significant majority of family wealth disappears within a few generations, not because the money vanished on its own, but because the habits and decision-making that built it were never successfully transferred along with it. The myth is that generational wealth is permanent once established. In reality, money without the accompanying knowledge of how it was built tends to behave exactly like income at any lower level once it lands in inexperienced hands. It gets spent according to whatever habits the inheritor already had, regardless of how carefully it was protected by the person who built it. The number on the account changes everything about what's possible. It changes nothing about who's holding it.